Apply. They came with the rising sun, their dragon-headed ships slicing through icy waves, striking both fear and wonder across distant shores. Apply. Were they ruthless raiders who left villages in flames, or brilliant explorers who pushed the boundaries of the known world? Apply. The Norsemen, Vikings, remain one of history's most fascinating enigmas. Behind the horned helmet myths lies a story of ambition, survival, trade, apply, and discovery that forever changed the course of civilizations. Tonight we journey into their world, uncovering the truth about the warriors who carved their legend on land and sea. Apply. When we think of the Vikings, we often picture fierce warriors storming the coastlines of Europe, their swords glinting in the sun, their shields clashing in unison. Apply. But the true heart of Viking power, the very secret behind their success, was not their weapons. It was their ships, these vessels, crafted with ingenuity and precision. Apply were more than just boats. They were floating masterpieces of engineering that changed the course of history. Viking longships were unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. Apply. Built to be both light and durable, they could glide across the open ocean and then, with the same ease, slip into shallow rivers where enemy defenses least expected them. Apply. This dual ability gave Vikings an unparalleled advantage, allowing them to strike swiftly, disappear into the mist, and reappear miles inland. Apply, far from where traditional armies could ever reach. Imagine the fear of a monastery deep in France or England. Apply. Thinking itself safe from the sea, only to suddenly hear the thunder of oars and sea dragon, headed prows slicing through the river fog. But how did they achieve this brilliance? Apply. Their secret lay in design and craftsmanship. Viking shipbuilders perfected a technique called clinker building, where overlapping planks were riveted together. Apply, creating a hull that was both flexible and incredibly strong. Unlike the heavy, clumsy ships of other nations, Viking vessels bent with the waves rather than against them. Apply, making them nearly indestructible in stormy seas. Their shallow draft meant they could travel in as little as 3 feet of water, perfect for surprise raids and exploration alike. Apply. Each ship was powered not just by sails, but by the sheer strength of oarsmen, often dozens of them, whose synchronized rowing could drive the vessel at terrifying speeds. Apply. The distinctive square sails, dyed with stripes of red and black, harnessed the wind for long journeys across the North Atlantic. Apply. This combination of oars and sails gave Vikings unmatched control, enabled them to cover incredible distances, sometimes hundreds of miles in just a few days. Apply. And these weren't only tools of war. The same ships that carried raiders to foreign shores also carried traders and explorers to new worlds. Apply. Archaeological finds reveal that Vikings sailed as far south as the Mediterranean and as far east as the rivers of Russia. Apply. Forging trade routes that connected Scandinavia with Byzantium and the Islamic caliphates. And most astonishing of all, they pushed westward across the icy seas, reaching Greenland. Apply. And even setting foot in North America centuries before Columbus dreamed of the voyage. Without their ships, such daring journeys would have been impossible. Apply. Very look of these ships struck awe and terror. The prows were often carved into fearsome dragon heads or serpents, meant to ward off sea monsters and intimidate enemies. Apply. When a Viking fleet appeared on the horizon, it wasn't just a naval force, it was a psychological weapon. Apply. The sight of those ships alone was enough to send villagers fleeing before. When most people hear the word Viking, they immediately imagine bloodthirsty warriors charging ashore. Apply. Axes raised high, setting villages aflame. The image is vivid, powerful, and, thanks to centuries of legends, etched into our collective imagination. Apply. But to see Vikings only as ruthless raiders is to miss the larger, richer truth of who they really were. These Norsemen lived complex lives. They were not defined solely by violence. Apply. In fact, when they weren't sailing off on expeditions, many were farmers, herders, traders, and master craftsmen. Apply, building communities that sustained their people and spread their culture across continents. In the harsh landscapes of Scandinavia, Norway, Sweden, apply. In Denmark, the soil was not always kind and winters were long and brutal. Survival required resilience and resourcefulness. Viking families relied heavily on farming. Apply, cultivating barley, rye, and oats that became the backbone of their diet. They raised livestock too, cattle, pigs, sheep, and goats, providing milk, meat, and wool. Apply. Every village thrived on this agricultural backbone, and in many cases, raiding was not a daily activity but a seasonal endeavor. When spring came, apply. Some men would set sail to seek fortune abroad while their families stayed behind to tend the fields, ensuring the community's survival. Beyond farming, apply. Trade was at the core of Viking life. Their ships were not always loaded with warriors. Sometimes they carried furs, amber, iron, apply, and walrus ivory, goods from the cold north that were highly prized in distant lands. In exchange, they brought back silver, silk, wine, spices, and even exotic jewelry. Apply. Archaeological discoveries reveal Viking settlements filled with treasures from as far away as the Middle East. Apply. Imagine walking through a Viking marketplace where Arabic coins jingle in leather pouches, Byzantine glassware gleams in the sunlight. Apply. And spices from distant deserts fill the air with unfamiliar scents. These exchanges connected the Vikings to a vast web of civilizations, making them not just invaders, apply, but vital players in the global economy of their time. Then there were their skills as craftsmen. Viking artisans were nothing short of extraordinary. Apply. They carved intricate designs into wood and bone, forged weapons of steel so strong they rivaled any in Europe, and created jewelry of astonishing beauty. Apply. From brooches and arm rings to ornate ship carvings, their art revealed a culture that valued beauty as much as strength. Their longhouses, built with sturdy timber and clever design, apply, were warm sanctuaries against winter's fury. Even their tools and farming equipment displayed an understanding of engineering that made daily survival not only possible but efficient. Apply. And what about family life? Contrary to the stereotype of wild marauders, Vikings built tightly knit communities. Social gatherings, feasts, apply, and storytelling were at the heart of their culture. Their sagas, epic tales passed down through generations, celebrated not only battles but also voyages, trade, love. Apply. In the bonds of family, women too played powerful roles, managing households, overseeing farms, and even traveling on trading expeditions. Some women, like the legendary shield maidens, apply, may have even fought alongside men, blurring the lines of what was expected in medieval societies. So while the thunder of Viking raids echoes loudly in history books, the quieter, apply, everyday truth is just as important. The Vikings were farmers tilling the earth, traders crossing continents, and artisans shaping metal and wood with skillful hands. Apply. Their world was not built on destruction alone, but on creation, exchange, and survival. Apply. To understand them fully is to see beyond the sword and the fire, to recognize a civilization that thrived not only because of what it took, apply, but also because of what it built and shared with the wider world. For centuries, apply, the story of the discovery of the New World has been told with a single name at its center, Christopher Columbus. In 1492, the narrative goes, apply, he sailed across the Atlantic and stumbled upon lands unknown to Europe. But history, as it often does, holds secrets that defy the simplified versions we're taught in school. Apply. Long before Columbus raised his sails, the Vikings had already ventured into the vast Atlantic, driven not by accident, but by design, courage, and their unmatched seafaring skills. Apply. Evidence carved into the earth and whispered through sagas reveals that these Norse explorers reached North America nearly 500 years before Columbus ever set foot on a ship bound for the west. Apply. The saga begins in Greenland, where Eric the Red established settlements after his exile from Iceland. Harsh, icy, yet filled with opportunity. Apply. Greenland became a stepping stone, a launch pad into the unknown. From there, his son, Leif Erikson, embarked on a voyage that would forever alter history. Apply. Guided by tales of lands glimpsed by earlier sailors, Leif steered his longship westward, beyond the horizon that most medieval Europeans feared to cross. Apply. His journey carried him to a place he called Vinland, a land rich with resources, fertile soil, and wild grapes growing in abundance. For the Vikings, accustomed to the rocky, apply, frozen landscapes of the north, Vinland was nothing short of paradise. Skeptics once dismissed these tales as myths, but the earth has spoken louder than doubt. In the 1960s, apply, archaeologists Helge and Anne Steiningstad uncovered the remains of a Norse settlement at Alanzox Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. There, apply, the unmistakable traces of Viking craftsmanship, emerged turf-walled houses, iron nails forged in Norse style, and tools that bore the signature of Scandinavian hands. Apply, radiocarbon dating confirmed what the sagas had whispered. The Vikings were there around the year 1000, centuries before Columbus's ships ever touched the Caribbean. Apply, and this was no accidental voyage. The Viking longships were built for precisely this kind of daring exploration. With their shallow drafts and resilient hulls, apply, they could cross treacherous waters and withstand the unpredictable tempests of the North Atlantic. Imagine the sight: a fleet of sleek wooden vessels, sails taut with wind, apply, cresting waves that would have broken lesser ships. The courage it took to set out across endless seas with no maps, no modern navigation, apply, and no certainty of what lay beyond is staggering. Yet the Vikings did it again and again. Their presence in North America raises profound questions. Apply. What might have happened if those early settlements had flourished? Could the history of the continent have unfolded differently if Viking colonies had taken root? Apply. While their North American ventures were short-lived, abandoned due to hostile encounters with indigenous peoples, isolation, apply, and the challenges of sustaining life, so far from home. The very fact that they reached these shores reshapes our understanding of exploration. Apply. The Vikings were not simply raiders of Europe. They were visionaries, pioneers who pushed the boundaries of the known world. Even today, traces of their journeys spark imagination. Apply. The sagas describe encounters with skrælings, believed to be the ancestors of modern Inuit and native peoples. These meetings were often tense, sometimes violent. Apply, but they mark one of the earliest known interactions between Europeans and the indigenous peoples of North America, half a millennium before Columbus set his course. So, apply, when we think of exploration and the bravery it demands, the image of Leif Erikson steering his ship into the unknown deserves a place alongside any story of discovery. Apply. His voyage proves that the thirst for adventure, for pushing past horizons, did not begin in the 15th century. Apply. It began with the Vikings, men and women who dared to believe there was more beyond the edge of the map and who proved it with their sails, their courage, and their indomitable will. Apply. When you close your eyes and picture a Viking, chances are the image is unmistakable, a fierce warrior, face painted with war marks, sword raised high. Apply, and on his head those iconic horned helmets. It is an image that Hollywood, comic books, and costume designers have burned into our imagination. Apply, yet here lies one of history's greatest misconceptions. The truth is, Vikings never wore horned helmets in battle. Apply, that enduring image, the warrior crowned with curved horns, was not born on the bloody shores of medieval Europe, but on the stages of the 19th century. Let's rewind. Apply. Archaeologists have scoured Viking burial sites and battlefields for centuries. They have uncovered swords, axes, shields, jewelry, ships, and even traces of everyday household goods. Apply. But what they have never found is evidence of horned helmets. Real Viking helmets, rare though they are, were simple, functional, and practical. They were usually made of iron. Apply. Shaped into a rounded or conical form, sometimes with a nose guard. Designed for protection, they were built to deflect blows and withstand combat, not to look dramatic. Horns, Apply by contrast, would have been disastrous. Imagine stepping into battle with protruding spikes on your head. They could catch a sword, unbalance the fighter, apply or give the enemy an easy handhold to pull you down. For warriors whose survival depended on agility and efficiency, such a design would have been pure folly. Apply. So where did this myth begin? The answer lies not with the Vikings themselves, but with artists and storytellers centuries later. In the 1800s, Apply, Europe experienced a surge of fascination with Norse mythology. Writers, painters, and musicians revived ancient sagas and legends. Apply, romanticizing the Vikings as larger than life heroes of a bygone era. During this cultural rebirth, German composer Richard Wagner staged his epic opera cycle Der Ring des Nibelungen. Apply. For dramatic flair, Wagner's costume designers added horned helmets to the Viking-inspired characters, creating a striking and unforgettable visual. Audiences were captivated. Soon, Apply. The image spread across posters, books, and illustrations, cementing itself in the public imagination. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Apply. The horned, helmeted Viking was everywhere. Children's books depicted them that way. Painters added horns to their portraits of Norse warriors. Apply. Costume makers leaned into the design for plays and pageants. Even when scholars pointed out the inaccuracy, the myth was too powerful, too theatrical to let go. Apply. Hollywood later embraced the image, feeding it to global audiences through films, television, and even cartoons. The result, Apply, a misconception so widespread that it's nearly impossible to separate the Viking from his supposed horns in popular culture. But if Vikings didn't wear horns in battle, Apply, did horns ever play a role in their culture? Interestingly, yes, but not in the way we imagine. Archaeologists have found ceremonial headgear adorned with horns in much earlier contexts. Apply, dating back to the Bronze Age. These were not Viking artifacts, but relics from pre-Viking Northern Europe, used in rituals or ceremonies likely to symbolize power, fertility, Apply, or connections to the gods. By the Viking Age itself, however, such headpieces had disappeared from practical use. Apply, the warriors who sailed across seas and stormed foreign lands fought in plain, protective helmets, or sometimes with no helmets at all. Apply, this misunderstanding reveals something fascinating about history. Sometimes myths survive longer than facts. Apply. The horned helmet is a perfect example of how powerful imagery can reshape collective memory. Though the Vikings never wore them, horns became a symbol of savagery, wildness, Apply, and untamed power, qualities later storytellers wanted to emphasize. Today, costume shops still sell Viking helmets with horns. Football teams use the design in their logos. Apply, and pop culture clings tightly to the myth. So, the next time you picture a Viking with horns curving into the sky, remember it wasn't history that gave him that crown, it was opera. Apply. Art and imagination. The true Viking was no less fierce without it, and in many ways, understanding what they really wore makes their story even more authentic, even more human. Apply. When we think of medieval Europe, We often picture women bound by strict roles, married off young, stripped of independence, and locked into lives dictated by men. Apply. But in the icy fjords and rugged landscapes of Viking Scandinavia, the story unfolded differently. Viking women, though not free from hardship, lived with rights and freedoms that set them apart from most of their European contemporaries. In their world, women could own land, inherit wealth, demand divorce, and even shape the destiny of their families and communities. Their role in Viking society was not just to serve, it was to stand as partners, leaders, and sometimes even warriors. At the heart of Viking culture was the family farmstead. These were not mere households, but the very foundation of survival. Men might leave for months, sometimes years, sailing across seas in search of trade or conquest. In their absence, it was the women who took command. They managed the farms, oversaw livestock, and ensured the harvest that kept the community alive. A Viking wife held the keys to the family's wealth, literally. She often wore them on her belt as a symbol of authority, controlling the storehouses of food, valuables, and tools. To hold the keys was to hold power, a clear mark of trust and respect. Legally, Viking women had protections that were extraordinary for the time. They could inherit property from their parents or husbands. And this inheritance was not just symbolic. It could be land, silver, or entire estates. If a marriage soured, the woman had the right to divorce her husband. An option unheard of in most parts of Europe during the same era. Divorce was not scandalous. It was simply part of their legal system. If a man mistreated his wife, failed to provide, or if the marriage proved unbearable, the woman could walk away with her dowry and reclaim her independence. In a society so harsh and survival-driven, this level of autonomy was revolutionary. The sagas, the legendary stories passed down by Norse storytellers, are filled with women who embodied strength and influence. Figures like Gudrid, the far traveler who sailed across the Atlantic and lived in North America, or Odd the Deep-Minded, who led her people to settle in Iceland, reveal a legacy of boldness and leadership. These were not background characters. They were central figures in shaping the Viking Age. Even in matters of law and politics, women could wield influence. Some acted as witnesses in court, others negotiated alliances, and a few even ruled as queens or regents when circumstance demanded. And then there were the legendary shield maidens, women who, according to the sagas, took up arms and fought alongside men. While historians debate the extent of their presence, archaeological evidence suggests that some women were indeed buried with weapons, raising tantalizing questions about whether female warriors were more than myth. Whether rare exceptions or celebrated legends, the idea of women stepping into the battlefield only added to the complexity of Viking society. In contrast, much of Christian Europe at the same time relegated women to roles of near invisibility, bound by laws that offered little protection or independence. The Vikings, by comparison, granted their women a voice in property, marriage, and family life. This does not mean their world was free of inequality. The society was still patriarchal, and women often bore the brunt of labor and childbirth, but compared to their contemporaries, Viking women lived with remarkable power. Their legacy endures in the echoes of the sagas, in the graves unearthed by archaeologists, and in the admiration of modern historians. Viking women remind us that even in one of history's harshest eras, freedom and influence were not reserved solely for men. They stood not just as mothers or wives, but as guardians, decision-makers, explorers, and leaders, partners in shaping the Viking Age itself. The Vikings may have vanished as a culture nearly 1,000 years ago, their longships no longer slicing across icy seas, their sagas fading into myth and memory. But listen closely to the words we speak every day, and you will hear their voices still. Language is one of history's most enduring treasures, and the Norsemen left their mark not with the clash of swords, but with syllables that continue to shape our speech. Long after their conquest ended, the echoes of their tongue remain woven into English, surviving in place names, and whispered in the days of our week. Take a moment to consider Thursday. To us, it is simply the fourth day of the week, the day before Friday. But to the Vikings, it was Thor's Day, dedicated to Thor, the hammer-wielding god of thunder, protector of mankind. And one of the most powerful figures in Norse mythology. Every time you say Thursday, you invoke Thor's memory, carrying forward a Viking tradition that outlived empires. The same is true of Wednesday, named for Odin, the All-Father, god of wisdom and war. These are not just words on a calendar. They are reminders that the Norse gods once ruled the imagination of a people whose influence reached far beyond Scandinavia. The Viking imprint on English is especially deep because of the Norse invasions of England. From the late 8th century onward, Viking settlers carved out territories known as the Danelaw, where their language mingled with Old English. The result was a linguistic fusion that enriched English with hundreds of Norse words, simple, Apply. Everyday terms that remain at the core of how we communicate. Words like egg, sky, leg, husband, law, anger, skin, window, all carry Norse roots. Imagine speaking English without them. Apply. The language would not only sound different, it would lose much of its character. Some of these words reveal how deeply the Vikings shaped daily life. Window, for example. Apply. Comes from the Old Norse vindaga, literally meaning wine, eye, a poetic description of an opening that lets air and light into a home. Apply. Husband comes from husbandi, meaning master of a house, reflecting the Viking emphasis on family and farming life. Sky comes from sky, meaning cloud. Apply. A perfect reflection of how closely the Norse lived with the changing moods of nature. These weren't abstract terms. They were rooted in the rhythms of survival. Apply. In the world the Vikings knew and shaped. Beyond individual words, the Viking influence lingers in place names across Britain. Apply. Travel through northern and eastern England and you'll find towns ending in by Thorpe and Thwaite, all markers of Norse settlement. Names like Grimsby. Apply. Scunthorpe and Slaithwaite are linguistic fossils, silent witnesses to the days when Norse farmers and traders lived on those very lands. Each village name is a footprint left behind. Apply. Mapping the extent of Viking presence long after their sails disappeared from the horizon. The Norse also influenced the way English developed as a whole. Apply. Their simpler grammatical structures blended with Old English, paving the way for the more streamlined language we speak today. Apply. Where Old English was tangled with complex endings and conjugations, the contact with Norse speakers helped strip it down, making English more flexible, easier to adapt. Apply, and better suited to absorb words from other cultures. In a way, it was the Vikings who set English on the path to becoming the global language it is now. Apply. Language is more than communication, it is memory, culture, and legacy. And the Vikings, though often remembered for the violence of their raids, Apply left behind something quieter yet far more enduring. Every time you check the calendar, describe the sky, or open a window, you are keeping their world alive. Apply. Their words outlived their swords, proving that language is the truest conqueror of time.